PM likes to say it's almost benign, you know, that we owe it to Aboriginal Australians. If we're not, the implication is if we don't support it, we're somehow racist. That it's about a grace note in our constitution. But it comes with deep clause, because the language going into the Constitution includes obviously not just Parliament advice, but this issue of the executive. One of the architects of the Uluru Statement, Professor Megan Davis, she said, you know, don't hollow out this voice, don't take out these references to executive government. But these references to executive government are what all the constitutional lawyers like Professor Greg Craven, the good friend of the Jesuit community, Frank Brennan, no legal slouch himself, and even Professor Marsha Langton saying, yeah, judges and High Court challenges to the voice, absolutely, I'd be disappointed, I'm paraphrasing here, but I'd be disappointed if we don't have them. That's the problem that the PM refuses to adequately and honestly address.
Exactly right, Peter. The PM doesn't want to give us the detail because he knows that the more detail there is, the scarier this thing will seem. I mean, the last thing we want to do is further divide our country, further entrench separatism and further gum up government. And that is exactly what this thing will do. This idea that somehow the voice is going to solve all of the problems of remote Australia, well, it's not as if there hasn't been plenty of consultation already, but the problem, as we see in remote Australia, is less that there are no voices, it's more that there aren't enough ears, particularly ears in Canberra, listening to the people of remote Australia, because if this government was listening more and lecturing less, it would never have abolished the cashless debit card and it would never have abolished the alcohol bans in places like Alice Springs.
I don't know if you got to the Australian newspaper today, but I wrote a column today on superannuation, and I made the point that the government ran a small target campaign across the board, but I played the grab already. The Prime Minister, as opposition leader, ruled out changes to super. Well, we saw where they've headed on Monday with his speech by Jim Chalmers. It basically trying to deny that superannuation is our money. They'll decide what they do with our money. They'll stop us taking out our money or leaving it to our children or paying off our home. I think people have had enough of being dictated on super policy and broken promises from Labor as well.
There's two problems. Obviously, it would be a dreadful broken promise and it would be a tax increase. I mean, you've got the Treasurer out there saying that there's something terrible about the $50 billion worth of tax concessions that he reckons the super system involves. Well, every tax concession that the government removes is effectively a tax increase on the people who enjoyed the concession. It's pretty obvious what the government wants to do here, Peter. They want to force people to use their superannuation to produce a self-funded pension and stop them going on the government-funded pension. They want to stop people from accessing superannuation lump sums and helping them to pay off their mortgage. So effectively, by insisting that we spend our super in our lifetime and don't give it to our kids, what they're really doing is establishing a de facto death duty. And I think that's politically very damaging for this government, particularly a government which denied this in the election campaign and made a big boast about how honest and upfront it was being with everyone.
You would have seen a reporting of Mike Burgess's speech, the update, a national update on espionage. We heard from him, risk of terror, etc. This is the ASIO boss. Interestingly today, Sarah Henderson, she's now the new Shadow Minister for Education, speaking at a universities conference, she's called on the Foreign Minister Penny Wong to use the powers under the Foreign Relations Act to ban these Confucius institutes in our universities. There's 12 of them around the country. They're funded by the Chinese government. They teach Chinese languages and Chinese culture. There is grave concern, you know that from your time as PM, about what their real purpose on campus is. Do you support this move?
I think that all of us have had a huge wake-up call on the Beijing government over the last 5 or 6 years. These institutes were set up back in the day when we were all reasonably optimistic about China and the West being on a converging path. China's economic liberalisation ultimately leading to a measure of political liberalisation. Plainly, the doors have been slammed shut. Plainly, it's back to Stalinism inside China under the Communist Party. I think it's very important that we appreciate that everything China does is done with strategic intent. Everything the Chinese government does is done with strategic intent, and these Confucius centres are essentially propaganda centres. And yes, I think it is time to close them down, just as I think it's time for us to do everything we reasonably can to cut China out of critical supply chains and do everything we reasonably can to upgrade our military. And I wish we were upgrading our military with the same urgency that we're decarbonising our power supply, because I've got to say the threat of war is vastly more scary to me than what might happen to temperature a few decades hence.
Boss, the old activist will come after you with that comment. I have to leave it there, Tony Abbott. Thank you for your time.